Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 297, dated August the 8th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. Thanks for tuning in. This History Bite is entitled Baltimore Landmarks, the Greenmount Cemetery. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Juarez Lee Shelton, M.A., as well as click on that little notification bell immediately to the right of the subscribe button. In doing so, you'll receive updates whenever I post new and exciting videos in history, law, political science, theology, and philosophy. Thanks in advance. So, in this series about Baltimore landmarks, today we discuss the Greenmount Cemetery. Now, the Greenmount Cemetery, if you've never heard of it, or perhaps have heard of it, or already have seen it, but don't know much about it, it doesn't matter, all right? You're going to learn something today. Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore is located at 1501 Greenmount Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland, 21202. This cemetery is a large and historic rural cemetery located in central Baltimore, Maryland, Central East Baltimore, Maryland, to be specific. And it is now in the heart, all right, of a modern urban thoroughfare. But that was not always the case, all right? Greenmount Cemetery dates back to 1838 when it was formally established, and it was dedicated the following year in 1839, all right? The Greenmount Cemetery is one of the oldest rural cemeteries in the United States, all right? To be precise, all right, it was the fourth to be created, the fourth in the country, okay? Its inspiration, like so many other rural cemeteries in the United States, came from Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Mount Auburn was the very first rural cemetery established in the United States, dating back to 1831. All right? So you might be saying, well, Walter, what on earth do you mean by rural cemetery? Well, for those who are unaware, okay, rural cemeteries, the rural cemetery movement took place in the United States beginning in the 1830s and lasting arguably all the way down until the end of the 19th century. Okay, that is debated by historians. Some say the period came to an end after the Civil War, but I say roughly around the 1870s, 1880s, all right? And, until the 1830s, okay, most cemeteries, as you would expect, were associated with churches, okay? And needless to say, as urban populations grew and grew, most of these small churchyard cemeteries filled up fairly quickly, all right? And health concerns, as a result of that, were a constant issue, okay? So as such, these new rural cemeteries would soon come about, all right? Like I said, beginning with Mount Auburn in 1831, rural cemeteries were essentially cemeteries that were established on the outskirts of cities, usually 1 to 5 miles from the city proper, far away in a rural location, but close enough to be accessible by the people in the city itself, okay? They had park-like designs, all right, with trees and ponds and fountains and benches, like a regular park, all right? But it was a burial ground, all right? So in addition to being a burial ground, all right, these rural cemeteries were fully functional parks, okay? And that was the intent. And they were open to the public in that format, okay? Not only to be burial grounds, but functional parks, okay? Which is why they had park-like designs, all right? So, believe it or not, these rural cemeteries were the first real parks in the country. I know that might be hard to fathom today. You know, you want to take a stroll in the park and the park is a graveyard. You know, that doesn't really resonate much with modern folks. But back in the day, you know, graveyards that essentially had park-like designs were the first real modern parks, folks. And Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore followed this trend, all right, in being designed like a park, all right? So these rural cemeteries would be the first public parks in the country, preceding the ginormous ones like Central Park in New York City, that wouldn't come about until later on in the 19th century. So, a little bit of history. Samuel Walker, all right, was a Baltimore tobacco merchant, and he was inspired, you know, to establish such a cemetery here in Baltimore after visiting Mount Auburn in Massachusetts in 1834. So he would lead a successful campaign to establish a rural cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. Plans were drafted, and the chosen location would be the rural estate of the late Robert Oliver, okay? Given the geography of the area, known for, you know, its hills and trees, you know, this seemed like an ideal setting. And although Greenmount Cemetery today is right in the heart, you know, of Baltimore, you know, surrounded by an urban jungle to the 100th power, all urban around there, okay? At the time the idea was conceived, that location was quite a bit of distance from, you know, the heart of Baltimore and more or less right on the boundary of the city itself. Very rural area, lots of trees, okay? You know, and it was anything but, you know, densely populated. So it was just still very wild and untamed, okay, the whole area. You know, not anything like what you think of today, all right? Very rural and still just wilderness, all right? So anyway, the estate of Robert Oliver was always very handsome and well coordinated, and, you know, a better locale for the cemetery wasn't likely to be found in Baltimore or even on its outskirts at that time, okay? So to turn this plan into a reality, the proprietors of the Greenmount Cemetery, okay, purchased 60 acres of land from Robert Oliver's heirs, okay? And by an act of the Maryland General Assembly, the Greenmount Cemetery was established in Baltimore, Maryland on March 15th, 1838. Before I go any further, I want to add that the etymology for the name Greenmount Cemetery came from the name, all right, of Robert Oliver's estate, which was known as Greenmount. All right, makes perfect sense, right? Very hilly, tree-filled area. So the name Greenmount was anything but a misnomer. It perfectly described the area, all right? Both then and now. Still a very hilly area, but much more trees at the time, of course, all right? So the general layout and design of the Greenmount Cemetery coordinated by Benjamin Latrobe, a very prominent civil engineer with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. So the result was an elaborate scheme of gardens and roadways, which was fairly typical for the rural cemetery pattern of the day. All right. So on the 15th of July, 1839, the Greenmount Cemetery would officially be dedicated in Baltimore and opened for public use and interments. Yay. Okay. So since that time, some 65,000 people have been laid to rest in the Greenmount Cemetery, many of whom, you know, were very influential folks in American Maryland and Baltimore history, ladies and gentlemen. Some of the most famous individuals interned in Greenmount Cemetery include, but are not limited to, Johns Hopkins, very prominent Marylander for whom Johns Hopkins Hospital and University is named. Okay, Enoch Pratt, Baltimore assimilated financier and businessman for whom the Enoch Pratt Library is named. Okay, even though Mr. Pratt was born in Massachusetts, he's a adopted Baltimorean, Marylander. Okay, John Wilkes Booth, ladies and gentlemen. All right, the assassin, of course, of President Abraham Lincoln. All right, John Archibald Campbell, a U.S. Supreme Court justice and later attorney. All right, who left the court after his native state left the Union. All right, Elizabeth Betsy Bonaparte, who was the wife of Jerome Bonaparte, who was the brother of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, as well as Reverdy Johnson and a litany of former Maryland governors, congressmen, local officials, and other prominent people of past times. So there are thousands of famous people and some not so famous people buried in the Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore. Okay, and to discover all the individuals who are buried there, one is certainly able to go there and check it out yourself. The cemetery is open to the public. It is still available, to my knowledge, for internments, okay, as well as individual visits and tours. All right, all of that obviously should be coordinated in advance to ensure that the cemetery is open for visitors on that particular day. And as you would expect with any institution that is on the National Register of Historic Places, for which Greenmount Cemetery is, having been added in 1980, the cemetery does have its own list of rules, okay, that must be adhered to while visiting, this most solemn and historic and prominent burial ground. So, this, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our little video on the Greenmount Cemetery. Once again, located in Baltimore, Maryland at 1501 Greenmount Avenue. All right. So I thank you so much for listening to this video. If you learned something here or enjoyed the video, please drop me a like. I would graciously appreciate that. And if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I humbly invite you to do so now. All subscriptions and all likes matter. All right. I truly appreciate your time. If you made it here to the very end of this video, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something new. And hopefully I was able to shed some light, perhaps upon a very unknown topic for you. Thanks again. Take care. Stay safe out there. And I'll talk to you at the next video. Peace.